Hey everyone, welcome to episode 9 of Open Books with Alana and Erin, two female leaders modernizing the accounting space. Episode 9!
We're here.
We're here, we made it. And today we're going to talk about how to prioritize everything. Public accounting is so busy, and just life in general is so busy, and it just feels like it gets busier and busier, right?
Every year.
Yeah, totally. So we want to talk through how do we actually prioritize when it feels like everything needs to be a priority? So much of it hinges on those boundaries, right?
Right.
Developing them, maintaining them. But to start, let's talk through at a practical level, how do you actually prioritize what needs to get done in your day?
So I like to use the prioritization matrix. If the listeners, viewers don't know what that is, do a quick Google search for prioritization matrix. It'll pop up. You have a urgent but not important, urgent and important, not urgent, not important, and then what was the last one? Urgent but
Well,
not
that
important?
is the not urgent, not important, but it's urgent, important, not urgent, important, right? And then important but not urgent,
Right, that
and
was the
then
one. Yeah.
neither. Yeah.
So when something's coming in and I need to figure out, like, do I need to handle this right now?
Yeah.
What's going on? I think of that matrix in my head and like, okay, where am I going to put this? That's how I do it when things are coming in. I know we've talked about scheduling before.
Yep.
I really like how you do that.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah. So before, like, it felt like I was drinking out of a fire hose on a daily basis. I was someone who was like, all my tasks are done. I'll go home for the day. And then you kind of restart the next day with whatever comes in. Those were the days, right? But now, I mean, you just can't possibly get through your list, right? And so what I have started to do, and I can't remember, somebody told me about this and it was a light bulb for me, but I start each week, Monday morning, I set like the 5 most important things that I need to get done during my week. So I look at my schedule very much in weekly blocks. So I said, okay, got to get these 5 things done this week, depending on are there deadlines, what's coming up, various things. So I set those 5 most important things, and then everything else kind of gets prioritized underneath that. So that's great. What I've also then started to do is on Fridays before I leave the office or sign off for the day, I go back through what I got done during the week, what else came up during the week, that then kind of creates a draft plan for my next week. So I'm sure some listeners are like, boy, that is very OCD. And I might be a little bit.
Maybe just a
Yeah,
bit.
and that's fair. But what it does for me is it creates a clear mind once I'm done for work with the week. Like I know I have my intentions for the next week. And it also shows me like, geez, I have this one thing coming up. I am falling behind. Unfortunately, like I'm going to have to just like do some of these things this weekend or something, but it actually clears my head and gets me like a game plan for the next week. So a little OCD for sure, but also helps me maintain a little balance, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I am similar in that Monday morning, I have a reminder on my calendar to review all of the upcoming stuff. Like, what kind of meetings do I have? What kind of client things are going to happen?
Right.
To give myself that preparation for the next week. Instead of doing like a Friday thing, I do that kind of at the end of each day.
That's a good idea.
The other thing that has really helped me prioritize is inbox zero.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
If anyone knows me, they know I have a problem with email inboxes. I think my personal one is at like 16,000.
Oh my God.
And when I left the firm in 2021, I don't want to admit how many emails I had in my inbox.
Oh my
and
God.
that was like, I was doing a purge every year.
Yeah.
I still had easily over 1,500 emails
Oh
that I
my
had to go through. So I'm very bad. And it's really only recently that I've been able to start doing I'm not quite at inbox
Yeah.
zero. I get to, as long as I have 10 or less
Yes.
in my
So you
inbox
don't
by
have
the
to
end of the
scroll.
day.
That's my
Yes.
rule. I can't have to scroll.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do that at the end of every day. So I know, like,
Smart.
okay, these are the things that I need to get done in the next couple days.
Yep.
I'm also looking at my calendar because my calendar is my Bible,
Yeah.
basically. It is, I put everything on that
Yep.
calendar so that I don't forget, because we have so much stuff going on. It's so easy
Yes.
for things to slip through the cracks, especially when you're getting into like busy /
Yep.
tax season. There's just a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
My email did get up to like 30 during that time,
Yeah.
but luckily, both Chris and Sarah, the CEO and COO of the firm I met, are both inbox zero people.
Nice.
So they would make fun of me / tease me about my insane inbox. But that like gave me the
Yeah.
oomph to actually start doing it and stick
Believe it.
to it.
Yep.
And my mental head space when looking at my email is so much better than it used to be.
I believe it. Yeah, I'm sure. And you mentioned schedule too, like putting everything on
Yeah.
your schedule. One thing that I've started to do, because my calendar is just like it fills up with meetings and just a lot of fires and
Yeah.
I've started blocking out work time for myself, especially I got into like February timeframe and I was literally trying to condense, 40 billable hours into my weekend because that's the only time I could get client stuff out the door.
Yeah.
And it was becoming this really bad cycle. And I was like, geez, anyways. So I started blocking out work time for myself, and that's been really beneficial. You definitely get some feedback like, hey, can I book, you're blocked off this time, but like, can I just schedule a meeting? And I've started, no, I'm
Good.
fully blocked off, and that's been really helpful to
Yeah.
actually get stuff out the door.
I also discovered that during tax season.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads us into our next question
Yeah.
of protecting your time and
Gosh, yeah.
establishing boundaries. I had a little bit of different feedback about
Yeah.
it. I would block it out and I'd put myself on do not disturb.
Okay.
And it actually, like, the team really respected that.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know how they would respond to that with me being unavailable for a certain amount
Sure.
of time.
Yep.
But I did make sure to block out. So I would block out from like 7 to 11 in
Yeah.
the morning as do not disturb. And then I would block out 1 to 5 in the
Okay.
evening or in the afternoon. If I was working that long, maybe only until 4.
Yeah.
But they had that 2-hour window to ask any questions that they had. And then they also knew that we have our scheduled one-on-ones
Yeah. That's
throughout
huge.
the week. So they always have that opportunity. And I'm not going
Yep.
to totally cancel those. They might have
Yep.
to move, but we'll always have that during the week.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't get much pushback on
Good.
it. I think the team realized I needed that
Yeah.
to help them get stuff out the door.
Yep.
But I don't know what I would do if I got a little pushback. But I'm glad you stood your ground and
Yeah.
held that.
Yeah, because it just helps me so much mentally to know I have that work time. I think probably some of the pushback, not so much from my team, but especially I think in a mid-sized firm, there are a lot of things still going even during busy season. Like a lot of stuff still has to get done.
Yep.
And it was a lot of those things that people are wanting to meet about and, wanting to sneak something on my calendar, which is fine generally, except like I also have to meet a deadline. So I think it was just more like letting them know the why behind it. Like my schedule looks rough, but it's so that I can actually
Right.
take some time off as well, like take a day
Yeah.
off a week.
And I think that is actually very important for the team
Yeah.
to see that you are setting these boundaries. You
Yeah.
are, drawing kind of these lines in the sand
Yep.
of what you're going to do and what you're not. And it's when we don't have the boundaries that
Yep.
our team sees that and they're like, oh gosh, is that what is expected of me? Do
Totally.
I need to do that to become a leader in the future?
Yeah.
And that's not the case, or what we don't want to be the case for
Yes.
them in the
Yep.
future. So it's
Totally.
having those boundaries in a visible place,
Hmm.
I think, is really important, even though we might get a little bit of pushback here or
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
from it.
The rather have the pushback than, you know, not have the work time, I would say.
Yeah.
So I was still okay with it.
Definitely.
Yep. Yeah.
So we kind of talked about our boundaries,
Yeah.
how we set them. How do you help your team members set those boundaries as well?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with what are we asking of our team.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely, we talked about like they need to observe what we're trying to do, right, with
Right.
maintaining those boundaries and being transparent about that. But I think how I can help as a leader is understanding what I'm asking from them and
Mm-hmm.
being very clear about their time as well. So there's so many studies out there, and I think it's very fair to say that when you start working more hours, it is not a direct one for one trade off. And I think that's really important for especially young leaders to understand that you may be asked to work a ton of hours, but that's kind of a very traditional method in public accounting.
Antiquated.
Yeah, totally. Because it's not you work 60 hours, you get 60 hours of output. Like you reduce, your productivity is
Mm-hmm.
reduced. You work late one night, you come back the next day, your production that next day is worse than if you had just worked the regular
Mm-hmm.
hours previously, right? Like it starts to wear on you, creates a lot of burnout, not just in a very long season, but in a day to day as well. And so I think for me, it's first understanding that my team, just by asking them to work more doesn't mean I'm going to get more output from them.
Right.
And then just being very explicit about, okay, public accounting, there are times, January, tax season, we might have to work a little bit more hours. This is exactly what I'm expecting from you.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk about it. If that's not doable, there's other stuff that's going to come in the middle of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally fine. Let's all just be very realistic about what can be done
Yeah.
and just be very upfront about it, I would say.
I would agree. The upfrontedness, sharing the deadlines that are coming up, I think is really important. It's very hard because philosophically and like leadership, when we talk about leadership, I know in my head that hours over 42 or 43, whatever the studies have shown, that they aren't productive.
Right.
And that you're going to spend more time fixing your stuff than actually like being productive.
Yeah.
But there is, and I'm sure this is just because from a traditional accounting, it was kind of like beat into you. Like you are going to work a certain number of hours. And I still get that when I see people not working as many hours. There's like a little angry piece inside of me who's like, you have this deadline. Why aren't you putting in the effort to get us to this deadline? Because I have stuff on top of the stuff that you need to do. And it's so hard to like rein that in and try to be that like understanding person.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's really hard to not let that resentment kind of percolate and bubble up. It's something that is getting harder each year, but I think like this, we're kind of coming to an end of that, at least in our firm, where like we've really reduced the amount of time that extra time is needed. We've kind of condensed that down to about 6 weeks. Good. Maybe next year we can get that down to 5 weeks. So we're working to make it not necessary, but it is definitely like there's a part of me that was trained
I
in
know.
the traditional accounting, like you work 70 hours a week
Right.
and this is normal and you're supposed
Mhm.
to do everything perfectly.
Yeah,
And it's like the science does not back that up.
totally.
And yikes, it's so bad.
Well, and I think too, like, we both oversee accounting and advisory, right?
Mhm.
I also have a hand in tax at our
Right.
firm. But I think what's really interesting, especially at a firm where you're still very much in that they have the tax services, it can be very easy for the accounting and advisory service lines to still feel obligation or responsibility
Mhm.
for filling in those hours as well. When so many people go into accounting and advisory, because it is a little bit more smoothed out
Mhm.
and you aren't necessarily working January through April,
Right.
like as your condensed season. And so there's been a couple times where I have to remind a few team members who have been at this firm for a long time that we are not tax
Mm.
and we don't need to just be filling in those hours. There's always going to be stuff to do, right?
Yeah.
But we also have to understand, at least at my firm, tax works, a very condensed season. And then outside of extensions and stuff, they have a little bit more flexibility. And so if the CAS team is now trying to fill in tax hours, but then also get their monthly stuff
Yeah.
done, it's so easy to forget that everyone has their own like rhythm and deadlines when like you're in a firm where it's like tax season, tax season, tax season. It can be easy to forget we all have our seasons
Yeah.
and we all have a workload designed around that.
That is such a good point. I remember when I was still at the regional firm,
Yeah.
having that, like, so I had my hand kind of similar to
Yep.
what you're doing
Yep.
now, hand in tax, hand in CAS, and it would be from like the last 2 weeks of December
Yes.
all the way through to mid-May
Yeah.
of busy time. And it's like the tax team, maybe not the partners and
Sure.
the tax team, but
Yep.
like your accountants, senior accountants,
Yep.
whatever the titles were, they would hit it like end of January through the 15th of April,
Right.
and then it was done. So they
Yep.
had a little condensed one.
Mhm.
But the perception, I would
Yes.
say, was still that the accounting and advisory was lower on the totem pole.
Mhm.
Even though we were just as busy,
Yep.
we worked just as many hours, it just wasn't condensed into 3 months. It was
Right.
spread out from not only December to May, but also the other quarterly report
Yes.
times.
Yeah.
And we have our like monthly
Monthly
financials
that you
that
still
have to get out.
Yeah.
That really, I think, was probably a symptom of not having a true delineator
Yeah.
between the different departments.
I agree.
Or
Yes.
revenue segments or whatever you want to call them.
Yep. No, I agree. I think that's definitely changing now, but I
Mhm.
think it still can be easy to get caught in that mindset for sure.
Yes.
And so I hope by reminding not just my team, but also my locations I'm in, the firm, it's easy to see those you feel like aren't working enough, but we all have our own busy
Mhm.
times and
Yeah.
that's okay.
And we all, kind of going back to our prioritization, we
Yeah.
all have different priorities in the
Yes,
firm.
totally.
Mine is the success of my team.
Yes.
Like, that is my priority. It is not to get a tax return out by
Right.
the deadline. I know I need to do that
Yep.
for the success of my team, but there are other pieces there
Yep.
too. And communicating that to our team, I think, helps them know when to prioritize
Yeah.
things as well.
And speaking of prioritization, I think that's also something I've started to do with my team. I think especially newer team members when they come in, because there's so much coming in. And
Yes.
like we said at the beginning of the episode, I think in many industries, especially public accounting, it's like, well, everything's just a priority. Like, feel free just to get everything done that you have on your plate type of
They
thing.
are all fires.
Yes. So
that all need to be put
yeah,
out.
at the same time, please, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So I think what I've really started to do is work with my team members on what is a priority. How do you step back and evaluate that first? And let's get the prioritization correct. So then you're getting things done in a manner that they need to be, right? And that we're not freezing because so much is coming in. We're able to take action in a very smart way. I think that's really important to empower team members to be able to learn how to do that.
Definitely. That I always go back to that matrix. And
Yes.
when new team members come on, I'm like, this is what I do.
Yeah.
You don't have to use it. It's what works for me. We'll talk through it. Also, I will ask them if they need help prioritizing, especially during our one-on-ones. If I see they're kind of struggling, it's like, okay, do we just need to talk this out?
Right.
Great. Let's talk it out. Let's identify which things you should do first, which things are important but can wait until later in the week. Or like the last week of the month is kind of our slower one because we've got all the monthly financials out. We're good.
Yep.
That's the time for this thing that's important, but maybe not urgent or a fire that needs to be put out. This super common conversation that I have with the team, just walking them through it and then getting their input. So might start out with me saying, hey, I think these are your priorities.
Yep.
The more we do that, I'm going to switch that conversation to what do you think your priorities are? Let's work from there so that they're starting to internalize that.
Yeah. And also the priorities given the time of year. Because there's, you might have some team members who are feeling good. They're, getting their monthly stuff out in March, but they're just slammed the entire month of March. But they're like, well, I finished, by the last day of the month. I'll be good going forward the rest of the year. And it's like, that's really great to hear. But we have to build in CPE. We have some conferences coming up. And then you kind of see that realization come back over their face. So I think, especially as leaders, serving as that sounding board and just reminding them of, okay, well, this is the season we're in. Here's what else it's not just what's written on our priority list. Like, we're going to have to build other things in as well.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because I had that exact conversation earlier this week with a team member.
It must just be the time of year. Yeah.
I was like, there's always going to be a fire to put out. So we need to kind of build that time in. And
buffer.
Yeah, we need that. So as we are prioritizing and setting up our boundaries, we need to make sure we're accounting for the unexpected or the important but not urgent, I think are the things that always CPE is a great example. Last week of the year, getting 40
New Year's Eve.
Yep. But it's so funny that like it must just be the time of year.
I think so.
It's a common conversation thing, and a lot of people will do that. Like, oh, I got through February, got through March, smooth sailing.
Yeah, right. We got a lot we got to do this summer. We have a lot of initiatives coming down.
A lot of summer projects.
I'm sorry, that list is growing.
Yes, it grows every year.
Yes,
like, this will be a summer project. And we'll get like halfway through it. Like, this is a next summer errands problem.
Yeah, let's kick it down the road. But I was going to say, even helping team members with the not urgent but important, because those tasks are sneaky and they will quickly become fires if you don't address them, in a routine way. So I think helping team members learn that without it being a very tough lesson to learn, because we've all been there, right? Where it's like, shoot, this was a very tough lesson to learn because it was most likely client facing where we learned the lesson. So trying to help team members identify those things they can be doing in the moment so that they're not then sucking up time 3 weeks from now, pulling in people to help with a really bad fire.
It's very easy for those important but not urgent to hop that line and become the very urgent and
the dumpster fire. Yeah. Burning down the whole building.
I still have not myself have not figured out how to manage that very well. it's like I'll consider something in that quadrant, and every week I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
I've got time for that. Yeah, I've got time for
Yeah.
that. And then the little fires spring up, and
I know.
even if it's just like helping someone else with something
Yeah.
that I wasn't expecting, it's like there's 3 hours of my
Totally.
day that I had planned. And yeah, it's an art, I think.
I agree.
I'm definitely not a
Yeah.
like a master at it.
Yeah.
I get better every time something is client
Yeah.
facing and fails.
Right. We all learn and grow,
Yeah.
right, from those. But that actually feeds into when we talk about the lesson like learned from our team.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, for this subject, not necessarily something I learned from my direct team, like that I lead, but this is something I actually learned very recently from one of my colleagues is that not everything actually needs your attention. And that's been a harder lesson for me, I think, or a harder realization, probably a harder boundary for me on that end of like so much bubbles up to you. And I think the first instinct, especially when it comes from my team, is like dive right in. We will just fix it together. And I think there's always still a very heavy element of that, but it's okay when things bubble up for it to not be something that needs your attention truly, right? And you can either help redirect or give them the resources or the tools. But when you're trying to prioritize everything else, it might be that a fire just doesn't hit that list and there's other things that do need to get done, right? And so taking the time to evaluate that has been really interesting lesson that I've started to just pull from a little bit more over the past, during this busy season.
That's so hard.
Yeah.
When we were prepping, I was looking at that and
Yeah.
I was like, I still feel like I have to, it is everything I need to do.
Yep.
And we are adding new team members, and I know I won't have the capacity to do that as much anymore. So I think the next couple months are going to be like a hard lesson in delegating and then being okay with the results of that delegation. That is, I have a really hard time with letting go and being okay with whatever the result is.
I hear you. I had my first experience the other week with a fire getting solved without me even hearing about it from my direct team.
Wow.
And it was like, holy cow, like very impressed that my team addressed it. And it was very efficient how they did it. But I was literally in meetings the whole day, and so they couldn't catch me. And so we went out like, hey, you can text me. Like I have my phone on me in meetings and stuff. But I was like, okay, this is like me starting to feel better about like in all reality, it didn't need my attention. It was a fire that could be solved by the team, and they proved that it could be. Yeah, it was pretty wild.
Great.
I know. It was wild. Yeah.
Look at the team you've built.
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
That is great.
Yeah. What's a lesson that you've learned?
That boundaries and people's prioritizations are totally different.
Yes.
Even though we can talk about it together, that still is not does not always match up what is going on in their head.
Yeah.
And then the other part of that is the rest of the team members' perceptions of the other team members' boundaries that they set. And this, again, for me, it stems back to a little bit of that resentment. And I mean, back when I was in my first like introduction into tax, when I was told like 70 hours a week is the norm, you're like, I'm going to die.
Cool.
I would watch other people who were at the partner level. So like it's up to them, whatever. But there was still that like, I thought we were all a team working these horrible hours together, but these other people have these different priorities and boundaries. And that created a lot of resentment in me and in the other people that I would talk to about it, because we would all get mad together. On one hand, we're mad together, so we're like a team mad at one person, which I'm like, maybe.
Is that teamwork?
I don't know.
That's like a
group think, I guess.
Yeah.
Not great. But I think about that when I am setting or trying to work with a team member's boundaries. It's like, what other pushback am I going to get from
Yep.
the rest of the team? And how
Yeah.
do I make sure that I'm protecting this person?
Yep.
But not exposing them to the questioning and the resentment. I think some of that is just inherent to the individuals themselves.
Yeah.
And really depends on how you're hiring your team.
Yep. Agreed.
I think I'm a little more sensitive to it because I felt it so much. And I'm definitely a person that's not going to keep their mouth shut. So when I'm unhappy, I feel like a lot of people know it. That isn't great. But I think that's what I have learned from watching my team, how they've reacted to others' boundaries that they've set.
Yep.
And something that I just need to keep in my head as when I'm working with someone on setting boundaries, how is it going to be perceived?
Yep.
And how do I either address that ahead of time?
Right.
Or does it even need to be discussed? Or is it just this is how it is?
Right. And to that point, that kind of, for me, feeds into what I would tell myself when I first started out in my career is when you are looking at someone's boundaries or honestly their lack of boundaries on the professional side, it's easy to see what they're gaining through that. But what I think we many times forget or just fail to recognize is what they're giving up. Something has to give somewhere. And so when you're thinking about perception, like somebody, you think the standard is 70 hours a week, somebody's working 80, 90. It's like, wow, that like, how are they doing that? Like that's what I need to do. But I think it's easy to forget, well, they might be sacrificing on their personal side or, their well-being or, they've had scheduled things with friends that they've had to cancel. Like, I think it's so easy to not realize what somebody's giving up. And so just reminding myself back then, I remind my team now, like those perceptions, you're not seeing the whole story.
Mine is quite similar to that and kind of linked to my, like, what I've learned from the team.
Yeah.
Is like, this is what I would tell myself. You don't need to be resentful of someone who has different boundaries than you.
Totally. Yep.
Because similar to yours, they're either giving up something or they're prioritizing something outside that you have no clue what it is.
Yep.
Could be their kids if they are parents. It could be family members that are ill or something. Or it could just be their own personal time.
Totally.
And I have done more of that in this whole like transition from traditional accounting to CAS, where I'm like, I want to prioritize my own life.
Yep.
I only have one of them. I do not want to spend it hours and hours at the office. I think also what I would say is when I was in the regional firm, the people who are getting rewarded with accolades and other stuff were the ones who had no boundaries.
Yeah.
And that was like a good thing for them, and that was praised. And I would tell myself, like, yes, that may be praise for them. You are going to miss the stuff that you're missing. Like, you are going to wish that you would not give your life to the company.
Well, and the company always wins with an employee who doesn't have boundaries, right? And the employee very
Always
rarely,
loses.
exactly.
Yeah,
in the long run.
And that's, I look back and early on, I had no boundaries whatsoever. I was like, oh, it's fine. I'll be there like anytime. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about this in our next episode, but we'll talk about the the lack of boundaries in your gender and how those play together. But yeah, definitely would shake myself.
I get
Like,
it.
don't give up your personal life for
Yep.
the company.
Yep.
Because then the company's winning and you are just losing.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. I get it. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Open Books. We hope by that bringing forward lessons we've learned along the way during our time in the accounting industry, others can learn from us and share in our journey to evolve as leaders in the accounting community. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.